this. So I came back to Waynesboro, and I rented an office from Mr. Fishburne upstairs behind Fishburne Drugstore. And stayed there for 2 or 3 months, and then moved out by the post office. Palmer's place is right on the street, and my practice picked up. Then people could see my sign, and I started out there for 2 years. Then in 1934, I rented a house. I had 2 patients that wanted to be delivered, and they didn't want to go to Stanton, they didn't want to go to Charlottesville. One of them had a big family, and the other was her first baby, and she had only 1 kidney. And I rented a house, and I put in 2 beds, and my bedroom too. And my wife and I moved in there. By the time the first one came in, and another one couldn't make it to Charlottesville, and she had to come in. And then the third one was the one that had a house full, so she came in and had her baby. And we kept them for 10 days then. And I charged them $2 a day for their bed.
That was a real garden.
Plus delivery. The delivery was $35.
Was this the house on Wayne?
That's on Wayne Avenue. 453 Wayne Avenue.
The old Davis house.
Hmm?
The Davis house.
Davis. 1937, we spent two and a half years approximately on Wayne Avenue. Then the doctors in town wanted to get into it, and we told them we'd go in with them. They built one on the road towards Stanton, which is now a funeral home. And that would take care of 30 beds, approximately. That's counting bassinets too, I believe.
That's right. We were still in the old hospital when I came to Waynesboro. And on that ground floor, we had the emergency room, the colored ward, the dining room, X-ray. Remember, Christine Copper ran the office.
That's right.
And we did everything from there. We had our lab when they did BMR.
We had the lab was down there too.
Yeah, the lab was down there too, but when we had to do thyroid tests, they did it up on the 3rd floor, up underneath the tin roof. And if you think that wasn't fun doing those because they get so hot up there.
That's right.
And the X-ray department, the only bathroom down there was in the emergency room. People would get a barium enema, and if they really had to go, you'd go in and you'd see the barium trickling along the floor, because the only place, if anybody was in the emergency room, they couldn't get into the bathroom.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, I became interested in Waynesboro as I was finishing my residency in 1955 at MCV. My father was a chaplain with the CCC camps here in the area and the Skyline Drive, and knew Waynesboro. He had the Sherando camp in his circuit, and I had always felt that a good place to get started was where there might be a new hospital getting started, so that this became quite interesting to me. and really led to my settling here. And in the process of investigating it, I came by to visit Barry Kennard, who, as you know, was the administrator then. And I was sitting in his office at this hospital you've just been talking about there, that's the funeral home now. And a patient in X-ray right next to his office coded. I don't know that we called them codes then, but somebody came in running in his office and said, "This man has died in here." And Barry looked at me and said, "We'll go in there and see what you can do." And I said, "Well, Barry, I don't have privileges." He says, "You do now." So I went in there. We didn't have CPR as such at that time. We did what we could, and the important thing, as is now too, was to get an airway open. And fortunately, they had an endotracheal tube and a laryngoscope, and I was able to get that in. And then said, "Isn't there somebody around here?" Because I was beginning to feel a little uncomfortable. And Randy Penn happened to be in the emergency room, so he came down and took over. The patient survived for a while. I don't know what the final outcome on that was.
Well, when I first came, Tracy O'Hanlon had his office on Mulberry Street, which is now gone because it's the shopping center. And he called me and said he heard I was in town and would I like to come by and talk to him and, you know, see about possibilities for office, and then just give me a little history of what the situation was here. I was really apprehensive because there had never been a woman physician in the valley around this area. In fact, there wasn't for years after I came. I don't know how many years it was before a couple doctors came to Fishersville. But anyway, Bliss and Ed Watkins were really good to me when I came because I was really worried, and you know, how I was going to do in this sort of thing. And when a patient came into my office with a sore throat, I thought, goodness, people do have ordinary things. I thought they always had heart attacks or cancer or something really serious, you know, never having worked in an office before. So it was a real challenge, and I really enjoyed it.
Well, while I was here talking to Barry that time, he offered to show me through the hospital out here. And that's when another thing happened that really cemented coming here. Back in the earlier days, you didn't have recovery rooms, and people that were operated on went right back to their room. And unfortunately, some of them expired because they didn't have the constant round-the-clock attention that they needed coming out of, particularly at that time, ether anesthesia. And the Medical College of Virginia, where I received my surgical training, didn't have recovery rooms either, but they had put some in just before I finished my training, and I could see how important that was. And when Barry showed me that we were going to have 2 recovery room beds here, so that when Barry showed me we were going to have 2 recovery room beds here in its own special recovery room, I thought that was really state-of-the-art medicine. That's all I needed to come here. I also had misgivings, as you did, and I remember talking to Bliss one time because I had found out that somebody had been talking to me about me down at the corner of Wayne and Main about something that I had done, which I hadn't done, and was being totally misrepresented, and I was commiserating with him a little bit, and he said, "Son, you don't be worried about that. You better start worrying when they stop talking about you." How philosophic.
So let's see, Dr. Lidge, how long did you work here? Everybody knew you
Oh, I
as
came
Mom,
here in
didn't they?
1950.
1950.
My husband came to work for DuPont, and that's how we happened to come here. I had never been to Waynesboro until we actually moved here, and I had a 5-year-old son at that time. And There wasn't any office space. You know, now there are empty offices all over the place, but at that time there wasn't. Gray was building the Main Street building just above the theater there, and so in the meantime, Bill McElwain came, and we were both looking for offices, and so we had offices in that building. Bill Smith was in an old house that was next door to it, and Ed Smith was across the office. He was always giving me a hard time. I remember one time he called me and said, "Would you please go see this man at home with me?" And he was an old man who had a lot of heart trouble and diabetes, and he died while we were there. He always kidded me. He says, "Don't ask her to come. They'll die for sure." He always had lots of...
Well, yeah, he always had it in for everybody. I remember one time that I had operated on a patient for something, and 9 months later she was pregnant. And Ed Smith never let him forget it. He says, "You got to be careful when Dr. Calkins takes you back behind those swinging doors, that you don't know what's going to happen." In the emergency room.
Well, that's right. In the old days, we didn't have anybody in the emergency room all the time. And then we started taking call. You took call from 8 o'clock Monday morning till 8 o'clock the next Monday morning, and you were on call for the whole week. And you did everything. I mean, you saw everybody who came in. If it was something like a broken arm, I'd call somebody else to come in. But it was your responsibility to see the patient, make the decision, and decide where things were going.
What happened to your office during that time? Were you still
Well,
sent
you were
to the
supposed to
office?
be two places at one time.
Well, the patients were sent home
Yeah.
from the office. You just
Yeah.
couldn't handle
No way.
both. It was one or the other. And of course, you didn't live in the hospital
Yeah.
like you would have if you were in your training hospital.
Well, and then we decided, a group of us decided we were going to build the office on Rosser Avenue. In the meantime, my husband had died, and I thought, do I really? Things weren't going too well for me financially. The first 4 months I was in practice, I took in $54. So I said it was a good thing I had a husband then, or I would have starved to death in the meantime. But this group of doctors decided we were going to build the office where it is now on Rosser Avenue. And so I went in with them too. It turned out to be a good thing, and we all enjoyed and had a good relationship. Really, the doctors here in town were very good to me, and that was a big concern when I came, since there'd never been a woman here. But they really were great.
Well, that's right. There was a real sense of family. Dr. Weems and Dr. Watkins had both been so good to help get me started.
Yeah, me
And
too.
the reason that I wound up in that new office building was that one of the doctors that was to come in couldn't get the life insurance coverage that he needed for some
That's right.
reason, and so I was able to get his office space.
We stayed in that office, well, till I retired.
Yeah.
So did you?
55 to
Yeah.
88 or
Yeah.
when I retired.
87 when
You said you were interested in things that we might not have envisioned at one time. So many things have happened, particularly in the recent years. I guess the first really startling thing was waking up one Sunday morning, I think it was here in town, to hear on the radio that the first heart transplant had been done. We've gone through so many changes around here, our CAT scans, our lithotripters for kidney stones. I've often said, son, I'd love to live long enough to see what things might occur in his lifetime that would have the same effect on him that this heart transplant did for me, because at that time that was just an impossible thing. When I was in medical school, and these two were probably finished at that time. Penicillin was just discovered, and things were being treated with sulfa powders, as I recall, particularly in the World War II. Everything got dusted with sulfa. And during my first year of surgical residency at Vanderbilt, we actually recovered the penicillin from the patient's urine to reclaim it to use it again. It was so scarce. And now that works pretty well.
Things have really changed. Well, you know, in our lifetime, there have been lots of things with, as you say, the beginning of penicillin and all the antibiotics and all the improvement in surgical things. And most of the patients before died of infections, or a lot of them did. So the antibiotics have played a big change in things, and all the immunizations.
I guess for us as surgeons, one of the biggest things has been this complete switch over to outpatient surgery. And in the older days, cataracts were treated, kept in the hospital a week, head sandbagged and staring at the ceiling. Now they go home the same day. They don't even allow them to stay in the hospital.
Well, when we first treated heart attacks, we kept. I think this is a great idea, and I think we've all enjoyed talking, and brings back lots of memories.
Will you just say your name?
Oh, I'm Beverly Lesh. I have a married name, but everybody knows me by Lesh, and so sometimes I'm not sure who I am.
What did people call you when you were here?
Dr. Lesh. Yeah.
Some people called you Mom.
Oh, yes, well, that's true.
Well, a lot of people called her Dr. Lush.
It still gets called everything. Somebody at the clinic last night said, "How do you say your name?" I was trying to tell them, but I just learned to forget about it. It didn't make any difference.
Dr. Weems, could you say your name?
My name is Bliss K. Weems.
King.
Bliss King Weems. I came to Waynesboro in 1932.
I think you've got just about everybody on getting here the earliest.
Yeah.
Anyone?
I think you came here earlier than just about anybody I've interviewed.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yes.
I'm 89 years old.
And doing great.
Get around,
I think you do
Look
fine.
great.
raise cantaloupes and strawberries and leave people alone.
I'm Whitney Calkins, and proud to know that my son Dave is following in my footsteps, but primarily making his own footsteps.